Okay, here's something that catches the eye. A $400 million luxury jet. Maybe the next Air Force One. And possibly a gift from Qatar.
Yeah, that headline definitely makes you stop scrolling.
It really does. So let's dig into this. It's not exactly your standard diplomatic gift exchange, is it? There's a lot going on here. We've looked at news reports, official statements, quite a bit of material.
Absolutely. And the goal for this deep dive is really to get our heads around all the different facets, the offer itself, the whole complex dynamic between the U.S. and Qatar.
And why it's provoking such a strong reaction from so many different directions.
Yeah, exactly.
So the basic story starts with Qatar reportedly offering this $400 million Boeing 747, not exactly pocket change.
Not at all.
And the initial reports, they suggested it could be a temporary Air Force One, while the new ones are being built. And then maybe it gets donated to President Trump's future presidential library.
Can you imagine? But it's important. There was a clarification pretty quickly from Qatar's media attaché.
Right.
They said those initial reports about an outright gift weren't, quote, accurate. Their official line is it's being looked at, reviewed for possible temporary use by the Department of Defense. No final decision made. So the story shifted a bit.
It did. But President Trump's reaction, that was something. He apparently said it'd be stupid not to take it.
Framed it as saving taxpayer money.
Right.
A gift to the DOD.
Yeah, and he even compared it to the Statue of Liberty, which is quite a comparison.
It's certainly a parallel to draw. Then you have the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, reportedly concluding that the transfer to the library later on, that would be legally permissible.
Because there weren't explicit conditions attached, was the argument.
That seems to be the reasoning, yeah. Although it's definitely worth noting her past work. She used to be a lobbyist for Qatar.
That's definitely relevant context. And this plane, it's described as a flying palace, so we're not talking standard issue.
Far from it.
But here's a really key point, I think. Even if the U.S. did take it just for temporary DOD use, turning this palace into a secure Air Force One, that's a whole other ballgame.
Oh, absolutely. The retrofitting costs could be enormous. We're talking hundreds of millions, potentially nudging towards $1 billion.
Wow. And the company likely doing that work.
Boeing, the same company already building the actual new Air Force Ones.
Right. Okay, so you can see why this whole thing blew up.
Exactly. This is where the controversy really kicks in. You've got this widespread bipartisan criticism, which is, let's face it, pretty rare these days.
It really is. What are the main concerns people are raising?
Well, primarily it's about potential corruption, undue foreign influence. The sheer value of this thing, $400 million, plus questions about why Qatar is even offering it. It's just setting off a lot of alarm bells.
On both sides of the aisle, you said?
Yeah, definitely. And that leads straight into the legal questions, specifically the Constitution's Foreign Emoluments Clause.
Yes, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8. For anyone not familiar, that basically says government officials can't accept gifts or presents from foreign countries without Congress saying, okay first.
Precisely. And critics are saying, look, a $400 million jet, even if it's temporarily used by the government, feels like it violates that spirit, maybe the letter too, especially when you factor in that initial idea about the presidential library.
So the White House argument is?
Their line is, reportedly, that it's a gift to the government, not the president personally. And they point to the DOJ finding it legally okay. But that hasn't really calmed the waters much.
No, it doesn't sound like it. And then there are the national security concerns, which seem pretty obvious, really.
Hugely important. Espionage, surveillance risks. I mean, the idea of bugs on Air Force One, that's serious stuff.
It's not just a plane. It's a secure command center. Needs top-level secure communications, all sorts of defensive tech. Senators Ted Cruz and Jeanne Shaheen specifically called out these risks.
Yeah, and think about the process. Taking a luxury jet, however fancy, and retrofitting it to meet those incredibly high security standards. It's complex, it's expensive, and you'd have to be absolutely certain it's clean.
So how are Republicans reacting specifically? You mentioned bipartisan concern, but breaking it down.
Well, it's interesting because you see a definite split, or at least a lot of discomfort, which isn't always the case. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, for instance, said there were lots of issues to discuss. He called it hypothetical and said it faced plenty of scrutiny. Not exactly a ringing endorsement.
No. Kind of cautious language.
Very. And then you have someone like Senator Rand Paul being much more direct. He called it the wrong signal. Said he didn't like the look or the appearance of it. He actually said he hoped Trump would reject it.
Why? What was his reasoning?
He felt it wasn't worth the appearance of impropriety. and worried it could, cloud judgment on things like Qatar's human rights record.
Okay. And Senator Cruz?
He brought up the security angle again, but also Qatar's support for Hamas, calling those significant espionage and surveillance problems.
What about others? Any other notable Republican comments?
Yeah, Representative Michael McCall called the jet pretty lavish and said he'd certainly sweep to make sure there aren't any surveillance bugs. Senator Josh Hawley had that line about the president's plane needing to be made in America, bought in America.
A kind of economic nationalist take?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
Senator Lisa Murkowski just said she had a lot of concerns and couldn't see going forward. And Senator Rick Scott, he focused more on Qatar itself, saying they're not a great ally because they support Hamas, raising safety concerns for the president.
So quite a bit of pushback or concern within the GOP. But not universal opposition.
No, not universal. Some Republicans, like Senators Markwayne Mullin and Tommy Tuberville, were supportive. They focused on the cost savings Tuberville had that, quote, free is good. They seemed to dismiss the security worries.
And the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson?
He basically sidestepped it, saying he was focused on other things. Didn't really offer an opinion.
Okay, so that's the Republican side. What about the Democrats? I imagine they had some strong views.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The criticism from Democrats was pretty sharp. Words like blatant graft, cash payment for favors, wildly illegal were thrown around.
No, I'm a coup.
Senator Chris Murphy was very blunt, called it simply a cash payment to Trump in exchange for favors. He even questioned who would ultimately own the plane and tied it potentially to an upcoming arms sale vote.
So linking it to other policy decisions.
Exactly. Senator Jeanne Shaheen, like Cruz, hammered the security aspect, the bugs, and the need for secure comms. Representative Jamie Raskin called it a flying grift and really emphasized the emoluments clause, saying no present of any kind whatever is allowed without congressional consent.
Strong language.
Very. Senator Adam Schiff called it brazen corruption and a clear violation, pointing to the $400 million air palace. Representative Richie Torres also used the flying grift term, called for an ethics review, and described Qatar as troubling and not a neutral party.
Any other actions planned?
Well, Senator Jack Reed said he plans to ask for those retrofit cost estimates, mentioning they could hit $1 billion, and stressed making sure there are no hidden intelligence devices. And, as you might expect, Democrats are apparently planning a resolution of disapproval, though realistically it's not expected to pass.
Okay. This whole episode really throws a spotlight on the U.S. relationship with Qatar, doesn't it?
It really does. And that relationship is often described as warming yet complicated. It's got layers.
How so?
Well, on one hand, Qatar has been a really crucial mediator recently, especially in the Israel-Hamas situation, helping with hostage negotiations. You remember the release of George Glesman and Eden Alexander? Qatar played a key role there.
Right, I do remember that. And there's the military angle, too, isn't there?
Absolutely. Al Udeid Air Base. It's a massive U.S. military base, a huge hub for U.S. Central Command. That's a very significant strategic tie.
Okay, so important partners in some ways. But then there are the complications.
Yes. There have been accusations, historically and more recently, about Qatar supporting Islamist militant groups. Hamas is often mentioned, Hezbollah too, although that relationship has reportedly cooled. It's murky. Some reports even suggest the funding for Hamas happened with Israeli knowledge, believe it or not, as a way to manage the situation in Gaza.
Wow, okay. That adds another layer of complexity.
It does. And the U.S. actually designated Qatar a major non-NATO ally back in 2022. So that signals strengthening ties officially. They're seen as a partner against Iran, and they cooperate against groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Plus, they control a massive amount of the world's natural gas reserves.
So a key energy partner, too.
Definitely. Which makes it interesting when you remember back in 2017, President Trump himself accused Qatar of funding terrorism at a very high level.
That's quite a shift in tone.
It certainly is. And underlying all this, there's always that background noise, those concerns about Qatar trying to buy influence through massive investments and, extensive lobbying efforts here in the U.S.
Speaking of investments, President Trump's recent Middle East trip seemed to involve some huge deals.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely massive figures being discussed. Over $2 trillion in agreements reported across Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, covering defense, aviation, AI, a whole range of sectors.
And specifically with Qatar, what were the big ones?
Really substantial. Plans announced for Qatar to boost its total investment in the U.S. to $1.2 trillion. That's an incredible number.
Yeah.
Plus a $10 billion investment in the U.S. military facility.
Yeah.
$42 billion in U.S. weapons purchases. And that huge Qatar Airways deal agreeing to buy 210 Boeing jets for something like $96 billion.
$96 billion, just for planes.
Just for planes. And there's more billions in deals for quantum tech, drone defense from Raytheon, remotely piloted aircraft from General Atomics. The emir himself signed a letter of intent for MQ-9 drones.
So massive government and defense deals, anything on the private side?
Yes, actually. The Trump Organization announced a new $5.5 billion luxury golf resort in Qatar, partnering with Qatari Dyer, which is backed by Qatar's sovereign wealth fund.
Okay.
And you also had reports about Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, getting that $2 billion investment from a Saudi fund after leaving office, and a UAE-backed fund using $2 billion in stablecoin issued by the Trump family's World Liberty Financial. So you see these deep financial ties, both governmental and more personal or family-related.
Right. Those connections definitely add context to the whole jet discussion. So outside of Congress, what are commentators and various groups saying?
A real mix, as you'd expect. Podcaster Ben Shapiro called the potential jet deal skeezy. He framed it as taking sacks and giddies from people who support Hamas and argued it isn't America first, calling Qatar one of the world's largest proponents of terrorism.
Strong words. Anyone else on the right? Critical.
Yeah, Laura Loomer, who's usually a staunch Trump loyalist, called it a stain. She said, "We cannot accept a $400 million gift from jihadists in suits," pointing to alleged funding of groups. The New York Post editorial board flat out said not a free gift and Trump shouldn't accept it. And Mark Levin, another conservative voice, called Qatar a terror state and said their purchases don't excuse the gift.
Okay, so criticism from parts of the right. What about from advocacy groups or the left?
Public Citizen's Robert Weissman called it blatantly unconstitutional, a textbook violation of the Emoluments Clause, and warned that U.S. foreign policy under Donald Trump is up for sale. Democratic pollster Matt McDermott just called it bribery in broad daylight.
Pretty direct.
Very. The group Republicans against Trump also labeled it textbook corruption and specifically linked it to the Trump family business deal in Qatar. You might have seen the Qatar-Lago banner the DNC flew.
Ah, right. Any others?
A retired Navy intelligence officer, Travis Hakers, called it corruption in its rawest form. Political commentator Russell Drew used phrases like corruption in a gold wrapper and grift. And generally, national security and aviation experts are quoted as saying there are plenty of risks.
And you mentioned a Republican strategist earlier.
Yeah, Doug Heye, who quipped, "Flattery gets you somewhere with Donald Trump," sort of summing up one possible motivation behind the offer.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've got this highly controversial proposal, a luxury jet from Qatar, potentially for use as Air Force One.
Which has sparked major legal and ethical questions, serious national security worries, and maybe surprisingly, quite strong bipartisan opposition, even from within Trump's own party.
And all of this is playing out against this backdrop of really significant and growing economic and strategic links between the U.S. and Qatar, which just adds, more layers of complexity.
Definitely. And it is worth stressing, this isn't settled yet. The discussion is ongoing. Lots of questions are still hanging out there, and we might see more scrutiny, maybe from Congress.
Absolutely. So as you're thinking about all this, it really makes you consider the bigger picture, doesn't it? What are the implications of a gift like this for U.S. foreign policy? How do you balance these strategic partnerships against the potential for foreign influence?
Yeah, and what does it mean for the image, the symbol, and crucially, the actual security of Air Force One itself? Is it, as some argue, just a pragmatic way to save money? Or is it setting a really concerning precedent?
Lots to chew on there. Definitely a situation to keep watching.